Some people have computers, other people have Linus blankets. I have my honey and my coffee cup. Good morning. Every day is a special day. You realize how blessed each and every one of us are when you wake up and you can put your feet on the ground and you feel good. We forget about that. We really do. There are so many involuntary actions in our body and around our globe that we really do take for granted. I thank the heavens and the Great Spirit and God that I have been chosen to be part of the conscious percent, 10%. We believe now that there are about 500 million people who speak English. English, by the way, is not the most spoken language on earth. I'm sure most of you know that, but we believe now that 1 in 10 of us, each of us here, are part of the privileged 1 in 10, are what we call conscious. We are aware. We are aware of nature. We are aware of the universal energy flow. We are aware of our miraculous bees and the honey, which is, by the way, analogous to rocket fuel. Slight digression, a teaspoon of honey, 60 calories, about 12 grams, is equivalent to eating 3 or 4 apples and 7 or 8 carrots, but even more so, the constituents of honey, don't you know, mimic almost to a T human blood serum. You're short on vitamin B, short on vitamin C or phosphorus, vitamin E. The bees are, in a way, representative of nature in a lot more ways than we think. We have recently been very aware of the Mayans. Mayans were very cool people. All the first peoples were very cool people. We can learn and have learned a lot of lessons from the first peoples. One lesson might be that a couple thousand years ago, if you were part of the Mayan culture and you were one of the very few chosen shamans, and if you were the most enlightened shaman, your main gig was to tend the bees, because the Mayans believed that every bee had a soul. And the shaman's goal not only was to protect the hive, by the way, they were stingless bees, social, they all hung together, probably a city of 50,000, but they didn't have the fortification of a stinger. They worked truly as a big family together, all for one, one for all. And the shaman had to ensure that each bee that passed, that he was the ambassador to their soul, to the Great Spirit in the heavens. Ooh, how good is that? Pretty good. Because the bees are one of the main ambassadors of nature to ensure that this wonderful Garden of Eden, because we do live on the Garden of Eden, irrespective of what your faith is, whether you're a follower of the Great Spirit or whichever denomination you follow. The bees, about 110 million years ago, about 130 million years ago, nature believed that the style of trees, the Christmas tree, conifer. I don't have my little cone, I usually do, but the conifer, the cone, you see the way the tree cross-pollinated, they just relied on the wind. And nature is rich. And nature, everything in nature works. Because if you don't work, you don't stick around. And 350 million years ago, I'll step a few steps back. 350 million years ago, trees came from the ocean onto land, and they have been with us ever since. When we lose the trees, we're out of business. Earth, as we know it, nature is out of business. So one way nature figured out not to lose her trees, you see, was to get some pretty ingenious little critters to help. And about 130 million years ago, instead of just relying on the wind to blow the pollen around, the Great Spirit created hornets. Ants and bees are social. What's that mean? Well, people are social. Ants and bees are governed by women. Men are, for the most part, deadbeats. We're called drones, and we have but one thing to contribute. You can learn a lot from that, I suppose. But more importantly, what happens in social ant and bee colonies is they're hardwired, you see, when they get sick. When they get sick from pesticides, or when they get sick from the plants that they have evolved to flower. When those plants, you see, start to flower 2 or 3 or 4 weeks early before the pollinator wakes up after a long sleep in winter. And when they do get sick, they don't go home. It's hardwired in them not to go back to a colony, to infect the colony. So right now, and for the last at least 7 years around our planet, my colleagues and myself have been trying to figure out what's killing all the bees. We have lost over 250 billion honeybees in the last 4.5 years. Bees are dying, and we now know, well, we knew 4 years ago when I started to work on this pretty closely that the chemicals were responsible, and of course nobody listened. There's one particular chemical, a neonicotinoid, a very sophisticated chemical that when the bees are exposed to in the corn, corn is wind pollinated, but it just so happens here in America and elsewhere we plant a lot of corn. Corn gives us our sugar, and corn gives us ingredients for paint, and a lot of our processed foods contain corn in it. As a matter of fact, as a slight digression, we truly are what we eat. And my best advice to you is if you look on the back of any of the processed food and you can't pronounce any of those long fancy molecules that are or ingredients that are in there, I wouldn't be having too many of them. But to each their own. Nonetheless, the bees are taking the nectar and the pollen from corn, and what's happening is they're getting very sick. They lose their minds, and exactly similar, as a matter of fact, to Alzheimer's. And they lose their minds. They can't find their way home, and if they can't find their way home, they go to the ground and they shake to death, just like Parkinson's disease, as a matter of fact. So, one interesting thing, getting back to conservation biology, we are conservation biologists are charged with trying to maintain this rich array of our genetics on our planet, because what we have learned from nature is that it's the tapestry of everything, the oceans, the Floridian vegetation, the California vegetation, the Amazon basin, the Indonesian and Southeast Asian rainforests. It's a very complex, truly is a web, and everything is interconnected. Everything depends on everything else. And we're trying to maintain this genetic, first of all, we're trying to identify all the pieces of the tapestry because it's so diverse, we really don't even have a handle on it. We know from the Smithsonian there's about 1.6 million kinds of life that we've identified. Ed Wilson, E.O. Wilson, reckons there is probably a minimum of 10 million, but there might be a maximum of 100 million different forms of life. A lot of them are in the ocean, but still on land. And so one very important thing in order to be somewhat prepared for the future is not to pull all the strands of the tapestry and pull everything down, because as you know, you get to a point and you pull the last, pull one, and the whole matrix collapses. So we are working as best we can. We are forecasting for 2023, 10 years from now, there's going to be another billion people on our planet. That's a lot of oxygen, ladies and gentlemen. We need every last tree, and we are, as a conservation biologist and a field scientist, I hang out in the field. We have our species, unfortunately, is disconnected by and large from what's on the land, and that's not good, obviously, because those of us who spent about 3 decades studying forests in both hemispheres. And what I can say after 3 decades, mostly, is that I've been trained to see patterns. We can see bigger patterns. And when we start to connect the dots with the patterns that are happening, that at least gives us some insight of where we have gone and where we may be going. And currently, we have a situation where we're being shown that the temperatures that have been, Earth is warming very quickly. I'll get back to that, but I just want to follow this point through. The mature forests on every forested continent, so that'd be every continent other than Antarctic that does not have trees, are showing us that these elevated temperatures are lethal. Our mature forests on every continent are beginning to die. The combination of drought and insects and elevated temperatures is a very lethal thing. What we are now looking at, and we are very optimistic that the Obama administration is aware of what's occurring, because what we're looking at is future-proofing our communities and our species. And we have the technology, and make no mistake, I'm on a mission, and each of us are on a mission, I put it to you, but I'm on a mission to lift consciousness to 2 and 10. If we can get that second person, that's our tipping point for mobilizing people, because we all have a role, and we all need to work towards the common good, like the bees and the ants, because it's our birthright and our children and our grandchildren's birthright to have clean air, clean water, healthy soils, and oceans that will give us life and food. Currently, the oceans are faced with some very, very serious problems. We have, particularly over the last 150 years, our biggest challenge really comes down to one word: energy. And energy, without energy, couldn't have watched the wonderful video of the astronauts. Without energy, the astronauts couldn't have gone in the late 60s up to the moon. And soon, in a decade, I'm told, we're going to put a person or a couple people on Mars. It's all about energy. And so, conveniently, because matter is neither created nor destroyed, it's just transformed. Conveniently, you realize that the forests of 300 million years ago, when they grew and they fell down and they grew and they fell down, the trees, their role has been to absorb this colorless, odorless gas you might have heard of, carbon dioxide, and store it. They store it in wood. As a matter of fact, trees are the most perfect or successful carbon dioxide warehouses that we know of. And inadvertently, as they grew and fell down, and heat from the outer mantle transformed them into coal, oil, and gas. And coal, oil, and gas predominantly are what have enabled our society to make our smartphones and our microchips and everything, our cars. And so what we have discovered, some of us sooner rather than others, is that when we burn the coal, and a chunk of coal is amazing because a chunk of coal the size of our fist packs an energy punch that we're having a hard time matching. Not surprisingly, because nature is really the most perfect model and the most efficient model that we know. So what we are, and when we burn that solid, it turns from a solid to a gas. And essentially around our globe right now, we have, over the last 150 years, but mostly since 1980, with all of the release of the CO2, it's created a situation where Earth is not cooling off at night. It's not cooling off at night, and so the temperatures have increased 85% since 1980. It's not a long time ago. And we are losing the white surfaces, the Arctic and Antarctic ice, and the ice on the top of mountains and glaciers. Ice and white is a terrific reflector, you see. So when this solar radiation comes in, it pops it back to outer space. And as temperatures rise, the darker colors are attracting more heat, melting the ice. And it turns out that the ice is fresh water. And it turns out if we dial back down to 800 AD in the Mayans, which of the day at that time were the most successful first peoples, certainly in this part of the world. And when they were faced with 3 consecutive droughts over a 100-year period, the third succession of drought wiped the entire culture off the map. Given that we know that happened, it empowers us to be aware of drought, be aware of fresh water, be aware of how we grow our food, how we manage our water systems, and also what kind of jobs we have to create for our college students and generations to come. One is water management. In the United States of America right now, the engineers of Water Engineers, the American Association of Water Engineers has rated our water system coast to coast at a D-. We're leaking water, 7 billion gallons a day. That's a lot of water. But for every problem, there are 3 solutions. Humans we're tool makers. We're problem solvers. That's what we do. So we can begin to future-proof every town and every city and every state and create millions of real jobs. That's part of this next push over the next 15 to 20 years to prepare for what's coming ahead. We can't erase what we've done. That's a given. If temperatures are going to continue to rise, irrespective of what we do right now, what we are trying to do is not push the temperatures beyond a habitable range. Because everything on Earth is all about us. It's not about my friends the dolphins or my friends the blue whales or the incredible rhinoceros of half Southern Africa and India, it's all about us. And it's all about our children and future generations. And it's time for our species to view the earth as a living trust. If each of us had a couple $1 billion, well, we probably have a couple trust funds, I'm sure. And if we begin to look at this wonderful garden of Eden that gives us everything, clean air, clean water, medicines, food, very cool forests, very cool ocean. I encourage anybody who hasn't to put on a mask, go snorkeling, go diving, go into a kelp forest, go onto a coral reef, go to the Great Barrier Reef. Ooh, it's like a big bathtub, so warm, and it's like a kaleidoscope of colors, and you get to see a shark, and you get to see a sea turtle, you get to see dolphins in the wild. These are critters. My colleague Jane Goodall, recently somebody said, you know, zoos are an ipso facto. She said, might be, but you definitely don't put an elephant, don't put a primate, don't put a marine mammal in a zoo, because these are intelligent, these are uber intelligent critters. They may not be able to speak English, but they use tools. And they have a role. The apex predators, the dolphins, and the dolphins are a toothed whale. The toothed and the filter whales are very, very important in keeping the hierarchy in the ocean near the top. And by the way, we're the top, we're an apex predator. And in the late 1800s, some knucklehead scientist came up with the notion that, a little bit of poison ain't so bad. The regulations today are on lethal doses, LD 50. What's the lethal dose that'll kill something at 50? That doesn't sound good. All our poisons are based on a lethal dose of 50. So basically, we're eating a little bit of poison, and it's a cumulative thing. A little bit of poison's not a good thing. But when you're an apex predator, if you eat a little salmon that happened to swim by Fukushima, that's got a little bit of mercury in it, when we eat it as a higher level predator, that little bit of poison is biomagnified up. Right now, I have several axes to grind, and I'm a persona non grata in Japan, all right, not only with the whaling that's happening in the Great Southern Ocean, the sanctuary. There's 4 boats there right now, and on the 4 boats in a demilitarized zone, the Japanese have armed guards, coast guards, and they're out hunting about 1,000 whales. If it weren't for the Sea Shepherd, 4 Sea Shepherd boats are standing up for the whales. And the whales are being harvested under the auspice of science. And there's no peer-reviewed science of any value happening. They're taking the whales to eat, but the incongruity of that is there are tons and tons of whale meat from 2008, 2009, 2010, 2011, 2012 that are in a cold storage somewhere. People are eating it. We have slaughtered at least 1.5 million whales in the 20th century alone. That's unacceptable. That it will come to an end, I believe, this year. It's going to be heard in the Hague. And the dolphins that they're massacring, 20,000 is their quota. Dolphins have mercury that's 160 times above the level of human consumption. The Japanese government knows this, and they're sanctioning their people to eat poison. The bigger question is, where's the poison coming? What we do to our oceans, we do to ourselves. Climate change, by the very virtue of us sourcing most of our energy from carbon-based fuels. The lifting of the temperature, so these molecules are all around us, you see, and they're trapping heat. And part of that system is then reverberated back into the oceans. If you take a bigger picture of our beautiful globe, it's got such an exquisite design, you see. The equator is the sort of literally the hot spot, because that's the zone that catches most of the sun. And it catches the sun, and Earth, this beautiful blue water planet, takes that heat and it disperses the heat with its currents to the respective poles, and then like a big pulley system, the cold salty earth water at the respective poles is like a weight on a conveyor belt, and it pulls the currents back to the equator. You get this really cool, elaborate pulley system. Also, the atmosphere has 3 cells moving respectively towards the poles, and 2 upper air rivers are jet streams, subtropical and our polar jet streams. What we are seeing, ladies and gentlemen, today is climate disruption. It's all about us. In the climate has been upside down since Earth came on the radar screen. Some people say even 18 billion years now, the Big Bang was. But it's all about us. This summer, in May, for those who are watching the UK, in May, the UK had come through about 5 or 7 or 8 or 9 intense months of drought. They didn't have water. In May, they were so concerned, they didn't even know how they were going to clean the double-decker buses for the Olympics. They didn't know what to do. June came along and it started to rain, and it didn't stop. And it didn't stop, and the bees didn't even get out of their hives. They mostly shivered to death. The crops, the local grown crops, the peas and tomatoes and carrots that the English people like to grow, didn't grow. And the fruit trees didn't produce any measurable amounts of fruit. So the bees couldn't do what they do, and the crops didn't do what they do. English people imported the food, and the honey production was down 72%. And what we're seeing now, and let me just add to, so the bigger picture, and what my colleagues are faced with, why is it continuously raining? Well, scientists like to have answers, and so some of us looked, and it turns out that there is a direct link with the sea ice in the Arctic, which this year reached its lowest level 2 weeks even before we broke the all-time record in August. We measured in September of the year. And it turns out, you see, without the white reflecting the incoming radiation, that the oceans, the Arctic Ocean in particular, is holding heat. And I just want a slight digression. Somebody says, well, we really don't need whales. I mean, whales are whatever. And I said, really? You realize the narwhal, if you've seen that toothed kid, the males have the tooth, probably where the unicorn came from. These are permanent residents of the Arctic, and they hang between Greenland and the outer Baffin Islands, and they go back and forth, and they do this trip. My colleagues in Seattle and at the Greenland Institute put some tags on flukes of the tail fins of the narwhals, and 2 years ago the narwhals, because they dive about a mile now, they showed us that the Arctic Ocean was at least 1 degree C, 1.8 Fahrenheit warmer than we thought. So when the water is warmer and there's no ice to hold that heat, it bleeds into the air. When it bleeds, this massive amount of latent energy comes into the atmosphere. It affects profoundly the polar jet stream. Is a band of about 6 loops, like a sinuous snake, that circumnavigate Earth. What we're now starting to see are the polar jet stream meandering far south, and that's exactly what happened in the UK this summer. Polar jet stream meandered far south. Also, you may have noticed, you may have been aware that Superstorm Sandy, how could it be that hurricane category 3, then downgraded to a 2, how could it be that a hurricane of a 2 stature could bring such a storm surge and weather, by the way, that gave us 18-foot waves on Lake Michigan? Lake Michigan is far away from the Atlantic. How could that be? How could it be comparable to Katrina, which was a 5 that devastated, of course, the Gulf states? The fact is that old jet stream, the polar jet stream I just told you about, that wandered down to the old UK, happened to also wander into Sandy, infusing it with extra energy, because you see, a hurricane draws all its energy from the warm waters, but as soon as a hurricane comes on land, it has no more energy, so it rains itself out. Well, as it came ashore this year, it was driven from the wandering polar jet stream. Climate disruption is something that we have to be not only aware of, we've got to future-proof. Because, as I say, it's all about us, and it is all about global food security. And for those that may have watched early in January, Australia came off 4 intensely warm, above average warm months into January, where they set new continent land heat wave records, where on the 7th of January, the average temperature across the entire continent was 107. And on January 8th, it was so warm, a dome of heat formed right over the central part of the continent. We call it a heat dome. And it was so warm that they had to add extra color and expand the temperature range beyond any measurable level that in the last 100 years that we'd ever had. It popped over 122, which was the highest temperature recorded, 123.2 or 3. The weather map now extends to 129. These temperatures are very real. They are driving drought. And then the last 2 weeks of the month, Australia, it started to rain, and then it didn't stop. And their crops in Queensland obviously were flooded. So I put it to you this way, that Australia is a wonderful, very interesting, self-sufficient continent, mostly. One of their biggest resources is coal. They are one of the biggest, if not the biggest, supplier to China. Earlier this year, they ratified a carbon tax. Even though that's where they're driving most of their money, they've got a tax in place now. And we believe now that we know that if we go over 2 more degrees Fahrenheit, that our forests around the earth will shut down. And when the forests shut down, we can't walk over. I can't walk over and flick a switch and make it all better. No one can. So we have a very small window. Temperatures and climate disruption will continue, but we know we don't want to exceed a threshold. And we are all very optimistic that the Obama administration understands this finally. And make no mistake, we won the lottery. We're privileged. We're in the United States of America. We are leaders. With privilege comes responsibility. President Obama, on behalf of us and on behalf of our species, looks as though Boswell is going to take this leadership role. And we, as a species, knowing the consequences, this is not for This isn't up for debate. This isn't, we're all addicted to oil. We are addicted. So, step one, you admit your addiction. Step two, we get help. Help, in this case, is innovation. 40 years ago, if Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak were here, and we all said, your Apple computer, forget about it. That's, nobody will ever buy it. It's not, no future, no anything. Where would we be today? Our tablets, our smartphones, our Macintosh, desktops, laptops. Innovation is our best friend. Innovation, it turns out in America and elsewhere, in America, we have the highest concentration of brain power on planet Earth, spread liberally, the word liberal, in our colleges and universities around our nation. Let us have at it. We're problem solvers. There isn't anything a human being can't do. Remove this veil. Set us free. Allow us the privilege to create these industries. At the turn of the 19th to the 20th century, Henry Ford introduced the Model T. It turned out that was a disruptive technology. If we were all in the horse and buggy business, we wouldn't have liked that much. And all of a sudden, we went to the next level. And one of my mentors and friends, Gordon and 7 or 8, 9 others, worked to create the silicon chip. They formed a little company in the early 60s, Intel. And by the late 60s, IBM, Hewlett Packard, they brought the first computers. Do you know how many millions of stenographers got bumped? That was another profound case of disruptive technology. Today, one of the luxuries of being able to be a student of nature, and it is a luxury. My office is the natural world. We go to the ocean, we go to the forest, we look, we study. These are models. As Dave Randall just said, there is no unemployment. It's not acceptable. Everybody has a job. Everybody has a role to play. And so what we are doing, because there's lots of good news, what we're doing, we have an entire new science. It's called biomimicry. Biomimicry, we take our human problems and we look at nature for the inspiration to create the goods or the services to solve the problems. And it's a wonderful, burgeoning field. The toxicity that used to be in our paints 40, 50 years ago. You go paint, first of all, you couldn't even go into a place that had such a heavy smell of volatile organic compounds. There was lead in there, and Lord knows what else, but not all unfit for our lungs. We now have paints that dry really quickly, that are non-toxic, that were inspired from some of them from barnacles, some of them from clams. We have every one of our tires on planet Earth and every one of our cars and our light trucks. You realize if you ever have an opportunity, and I urge everybody to find a spot in nature, whether it's your tree in front of your house or whether it's the shoreline, and go there for 5 minutes. Make the time to go there for 5 minutes. Make the time to take your kids there for 5 minutes. And chill out, breathe, just be. Hook into the universal energy. Allow it to flow through you. When you do that, all of a sudden, your immediate stresses and worries, it's true, they abate. What you focus on is what you get. One way to get away from our problems is stop focusing on them. It's easier when you're in nature. If you ever go to the shoreline, you would see starfish. Starfish live, and if you see a profile of a rock that's exposed at low tide, you get a really interesting handle of how life along the edge lives, and it is on the edge. And the crashing waves drive an immense power. And how is it that a starfish, for instance, that is made of calcium carbonate, a very brittle substance, how is it that they can handle this constant pounding of the waves? Well, it turns out one of my geeky, sciencey friends looked at the cell wall of how a starfish, this brittle material, is made. And it's crisscrossed, it's laminated. So crisscrossing gives it strength. And inside every tire, on every car, on every truck on planet Earth is a filler. Keep the rubber walls from blowing apart. That filler is the exact crisscross lamination of starfish. If you've ever had the opportunity to go into a kelp forest, California, we have some great kelp forests. They, about 200 feet of green that keeps back and forth and flows, high tide, low tide. If you look at how the kelp, 200-foot kelp forest is anchored, it has what we call holdfast. It holds this beautiful, green, vibrant form of life that is an ecosystem unto itself. And some of our latest, greatest non-toxic, no LDs in there, non-toxic glues come from the holdfast of the kelp forest. Ladies and gentlemen, I know that our rainforests, temperate rainforests in the Pacific Northwest, our Floridian forests, our beautiful coral reefs that I went off on Ed's show on MSNBC, because the solution to pollution is not dilution. And when BP put 4, 5, 6, 7 million gallons of oil dispersant so we couldn't see the blobs, that was not cool. And that moved towards our coral reefs. Our coral reefs here in Florida, our coral reefs provide a cornucopia of cancer and pain medicines. The one that touched me and affected me personally were the leukemia medicines. My mom passed from leukemia a long time ago, but she took the Floridian cure at the time for leukemia. Our natural systems provide us with everything. And Earth is a living trust. We owe it to our children, our grandchildren, and to all life forms to respect it and also learn from it. There are industries. We are faced today with a situation where big oil and big coal and big gas will not relinquish control. Ruthlessly, they're going up to the Arctic. They see the missing ice as an opportunity to take the last drop of oil. But that's not going to happen, because we are going to ratify a worldwide carbon tax. I predict it will happen before 2016. 5% a year, we will pulse back to 2036, maybe 2040, so that we have weaned away from the very energy source that is killing us. And we're going to do it because we know better. No, life is, the only thing constant in life is change. And change is opportunity in disguise. We have no other option now, knowing where we're going and the future if we do nothing, to do something. Biomimicry it offers unlimited possibilities for unlimited unlimited industries. Energy. Energy is a wonderful universal force. Our oceans, each day, go to and fro. We know that. The moon, we have tides. The oceans globally produce 2 terawatts of energy. Globally, we use 1 terawatt of energy. Ooh, looks like some opportunities there. Entrepreneurs take risks, calculated risks. There are at least 4 different, that we know of, that are functioning, 4 different kinds of ways to harness the to and fro of the wave. And they've been tried in Scotland, in Australia, Spain, and Portugal. They have pilot in science. We do a small study, a pilot study. We've already done the pilot studies. They work quite well. And those 4 countries will be rolling out their operational plants. In America, we've wasted a lot of time. It's been a calculated effort to thwart innovation. If we told Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak they couldn't do what they did, we wouldn't be where we are right now. And we have done a good Johnny Unitas strong arm for a short while, and we're a little bit behind the 8 ball on some of our technologies, but others we aren't. And Google put $4.5 billion on the table last year, and our offshore along the East Coast, we do have offshore wind farms. We're going to have quite an array of those farms. Early in January, the Obama administration just sanctioned another 8 offshore wind farms, put a little capital to kickstart it, including one on Lake Erie. And there's some very interesting technologies, ocean wave technologies, that have been trialed in Maine and in Orange County, and they will come online very, very quickly. Our solar array, you realize that the sun bathes planet Earth in enough solar radiation in 1 hour to power planet Earth as we use energy for an entire year. So our solar our solar first generation panel is tried and true because it's in outer space. It's been there for 30 years, no moving parts, and it's providing energy. That works, and that was 30 years ago. Can you imagine how much we've advanced in 30 years? We have nano solar today that very soon there'll be buttons that'll be solar powering people with hearing aids and providing an energy source, I'm sure, for our smartphones, so we can charge it. Dave's already got a very cool solar charger that he slaps on his, and while he's walking around in the sun, his phone is charging. But there's unlimited opportunities for solar, for wave power, for geothermal. The Earth creates steam. There are steam spots that we're harnessing, wind on land, and any number of other innovations that will be brought to market if we allow innovation to take us there. So we know the problem. Let's get on with solving it. Each of us have a role to play, because the power, many people will say, oh, well, you know, this is all interesting, but, you know, what can I do? I'm one person. Each of us can do a lot. And if each of us enlists the power of 2 of our friends, and ask those 2 friends to enlist the power of changing a couple habits, to start a couple habits. Drive 1 less car trip a week. When you do your car chores, do them all in a row. Certainly, we're suffocating in plastics. The ocean, the International Institute of Waves of Change, we have a blue community with 12 strategies to begin to heal the oceans. And one thing that we can all do is, oil is so pervasive right now in it's the asphalt on a road. It's the plastic bags that are the single-use disposable plastic bags. We recently a couple weeks ago, the oceans we know are teeming with many continents of plastic, little tiny little nerds, tiny little pieces. The turtles and the fish think are roe or eggs and go up and take a bite, and they get all these cyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, highly cancerous constituents in petroleum-based products. And they eat it, and they either suffocate or they die slowly, or worse, we catch it and we eat it. We will develop all sorts of complications. If we each get 6 organic cotton bags, shopping bags, reusable bags, and you get in the habit, run in the store, go home, unload your groceries, take your bags back, put them in the trunk of your car or your bike or however you shop, you just get in that habit. The bags are suffocating our oceans, and we can fix that like that. We will have, in no short order, new energy sources. Some communities, some counties, some cities already have, for those that have the ability to pay a little bit more each month for green energy, the option to purchase green energy. We have to make this effort now because there is no option for failure. We didn't reach the pinnacle of where we are so that we can blow it and just walk away from it. It's our responsibility. It's each of us in this room. And I need your help. The planet needs your help. Make a commitment to lift this 1 in 10 to 2 in 10 people. Because if we get 2 in 10, we win. And what's at stake is the living trust.